Hey, is this mic on? I've been thinking about something lately and how I move through the world. I notice people. I really notice them. I met this woman at a restaurant I go to, one of my favorite places. And something about me that I know annoys people is that I see people working. And maybe I see myself in them. I was a waitress once. Actually, I've worked almost every job in the industry, except being a stripper or a bottle girl. I mean, that probably would have been kind of a cool job, to be completely honest. I just didn't have the confidence back then. But women who do that, or OnlyFans, I admire you. I admire you so much. Because at the end of the day, you do what you have to do to put food on the table. And I know exactly what that feels like. I've worked everything from director of marketing to cleaning toilets. So when I walk into a place, I don't see someone doing a job. I see them. I remember one of my friends from Wendy's telling me she used to strip. She was a year older than me, and I remember learning pieces of her story slowly over time. She had left her dad's house because her and her stepmom didn't get along. And from a very young age, she was hardworking, really hardworking. She worked at Wendy's, she stripped, she did whatever she needed to do to survive and to take care of herself. And I remember helping her count her tips at the lunch table at school, which sounds kind of insane now that I think about it. But at the same time, it just felt normal. I just knew people judged her. I could feel it, but I didn't care because I knew her. She had a huge heart. She was funny, protective, loyal, really misunderstood. And I think that's another thing life taught me early. Sometimes the people society judges the hardest are the people carrying the most pain. And eventually, her sister became a stripper too. And then years later, I found out she became a cop. And that made completely sense to me because she always had a masculine protective energy. She learned early that she had to protect herself. There was a time when I was 16, I had just met my first boyfriend. And I remember I was with my friend from Wendy's, the one who stripped. And when he came up to us, I said, "Hi, I'm Lulu, the stripper." And I don't even know why I said it, because I wasn't. But I think part of me wanted to be someone else for just a little while. Someone bolder, someone exciting, someone confident. And he looked at me and asked, "Wait, are you really a stripper?" And I started laughing and I said, "No." And then he looked at me and said, "Well, you could be. You're hot." And I was 16, and that felt huge. Not because I wanted to be a stripper, but because I think that it was one of the first times I realized how quickly people create identities around you. One sentence, one joke, one image. And suddenly, people start seeing you through that lens. Maybe part of me liked the attention. Maybe part of me liked stepping outside of the shy version of myself for a second. Because at that age, you're still experimenting with who you are, trying on personalities, trying on confidence, trying to figure out what power even means. And there were definitely moments in my life where it did cross my mind more than once. The idea of using my body to make money, not because I thought less of the woman who did it, but because when you're struggling financially, your mind starts calculating survival in different ways. And part of me wondered if I could do it. But every single time it crossed my mind, I heard my dad's voice. I remember him saying once, "Whatever you do, please don't be the girl stripping. Do anything else but that." And I kept that with me because I loved him and I knew it would hurt him. But I also don't think I had the confidence to do it anyway, which is interesting to me to think now because I admire women who walk into a room like that. Women who seemed fearless, comfortable in their own bodies, comfortable being looked at, and I wasn't, at least not then. And I think part of me always felt too shy, too self-conscious, too emotionally exposed. And maybe that's why these conversations stayed with me throughout my life, because they were never really about stripping. They were about survival, worth, power, shame, confidence, how women perceived themselves. And I remember talking to my mom about it once, and she told me there were times in Mexico where things were so hard she struggled to feed her kids. And I remember looking at her and saying, "You always said you had such an amazing body. Why didn't you just become a stripper or something?" And she kind of laughed and said, "I know, I just never thought about it." And it surprised me because I think sometimes we assume people see themselves the way that the world sees them. Maybe part of it was her morals. Maybe part of it was culture. And maybe part of it was simply that she never viewed herself that way. And that conversation stayed with me because it reminded me how different survival looks for everyone. Some people hustle quietly. Some people sacrifice privately. Some people use their bodies. And some people break themselves emotionally. But at the core of it, most people are trying to survive the best way they know how. And then later in life, I had my first mom friend. And then one night we got drunk together. Somehow the conversation turned into honest, the way drunk conversations sometimes do. And she admitted to me that she had stripped once. And I remember laughing so hard. Like I was dying. I was like, no way. You have not stripped. And I wasn't laughing at her. I was just laughing at the fact that I would have never guessed that. Like it was not something that had ever crossed my mind. Because again, people are never just one thing. The mom making snacks for her kids, the woman serving tables, the stripper, the cop, the exhausted friend, the person barely surviving. Sometimes they're all the same person. And I remember another time, her grandmother had just passed away. And she called me and asked me if I had anything she could wear for the funeral. And of course, I said yes. I started pulling out clothes for her, trying to find something that would work. But we were different sizes. And I remember realizing none of my stuff is really going to fit her. I handed her these heels, really cute heels that I had not worn. And she looked at me and said, "Oh my God, I cannot pull these off." And I started laughing and I said, "Oh my God, come on. You're a stripper. You can pull anything off." And she got really quiet and she just looked at me and said, "That was a long time ago." And I remember feeling it immediately, like, oh, fuck. I was just joking. I was teasing her. But underneath that, I realized something. She did not want to be connected to that version of herself anymore. Like she had spent years building a new life. Maybe that part of her felt like something that she wanted to erase or outgrow or not to be reduced to. And that stayed with me because I think we all do that in some way. There are some versions of us that helped us survive, but don't necessarily want to be remembered by those versions. And I think that's why it hurt her. Not what I said, but what it reminded her of. Because sometimes people aren't ashamed of what they did. They're tired of being seen through that old lens. And I think that that's something that I've learned too. People are never just one chapter. They're the whole book. There's this show called The Deuce. It has James Franco and Maggie Gyllenhaal in it. And it's about the Times Square in the 70s. Sex work, prostitution, porn, power, survival, all of it. And Maggie Gyllenhaal's character stayed with me. Because it wasn't written like some flat stereotype. She was strong, rough around the edges, smart, protective, complicated. And I remember thinking, this feels real. This feels like women I've known. Women who have survived in whatever way life gave them. There was a time I was sitting with my bosses, the owners of the company I worked for, and somehow we started talking about the shows we were watching. And they asked me, "Have you seen anything good lately?" And I said, "Actually, you should watch The Deuce. Watch it with your wife." And I started explaining what it was about, the woman, the survival, the psychology behind it. how layered the characters were. And I remember looking at them and saying, well, she's not like you, Luisa. She probably wouldn't be able to handle that. And I just sat there thinking, what does that even mean? Like, I could handle it? Because part of it was really hard for me to watch too. There were scenes I had to cover my eyes, moments that made me very uncomfortable, moments that felt very heavy, but I still watched it because I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand the people. And later, I kept thinking about the way he framed it. Like somehow I was more equipped to process darkness or complicated human behavior than she was. Or maybe when you've seen certain things or struggled or been around pain, you become more willing to look directly at uncomfortable truths. But I also think that there was something deeper in that moment that stayed with me. The way people quietly categorize women, the good woman, the innocent woman, the sheltered woman, the woman that can handle reality, the woman who can't. And I remember thinking, people project identities onto women constantly, sometimes without even realizing they're doing it. Maybe that's part of why I've always been drawn to the stories that make people uncomfortable. Because uncomfortable stories usually force people to confront something real. And I know James Franco has his own story. He's an incredible actor. He was accused of things he's not proud of. And from the interview that I just recently saw, he seemed pretty regretful. And he took full accountability of his actions. He talked about addiction and not being sober and about making choices he had to own. And I'm not saying it erases anything. It doesn't. People were hurt. And I do think that there is something about accountability. Because we're not here to pretend people do harmful things. And we're also not here to act like we've never made any mistakes. We're human. And we are no one to judge from a perfect place, but maybe this episode is just me saying, I see you. Not your job, not your image, not your title, you. And if nobody's told you lately, what you do matters. Even if nobody claps for it. Even if it feels repetitive. Even if you feel unseen sometimes. And I think being deeply seen might be one of the most healing things in the world. Hey, this is Luisa, and maybe today your homework is simple. Look up from your phone, really look at people, smile at them, and say hi. Because everyone you pass is carrying a story you know nothing about. And sometimes being seen for 1 second can change someone more than you realize. Hey, is this mic on?